Hello, lovely people. Hope you're doing marvelously well. So in this episode, I'm going to break open a whole song and show you how I recorded it and how I mixed it. You can download the files and you can mix it yourself. This is a really, really great song by an artist called Ashleigh Watson. And the song is called Little Love, and it's a combination of me playing some guitar, some keys, some bass, Dave Rollicky on horns, so there's some great horn parts in it, and then some programming with me doing some live claps and some stomps and all that kind of stuff. It's a sort of retro Motown Stax Atlantic track. I really, really love this song. I think Ash is a really talented singer, and I think you're going to have fun watching how I mix this. I recorded, produced, engineered, and mixed this about a year ago, and it was entirely hybrid. So it's in my DAW, which is Pro Tools this time, and I'm outputting it through my SSL here. So you're going to see like how I work in a hybrid fashion. It's quite a fun track. It's got a lot of reverb all over it. It's capturing that late 50s, early 60s kind of Motown Stax, Atlantic kind of feel. So enjoy the track. Please sign up for the email list and you can download the files for free. Anytime you can try out a free trial of the Academy as well. And thank you ever so much for watching. And without further ado, let's go and check out the track. Okay, so let's start with the percussion. Before we do that, let's have a quick listen to the track, just so you can get a flavor of it. Of course, you can download the track, you can download all the files. There'll be a link to listen to it, which is probably flying around here somewhere. But it's quite a straightforward track in many ways, but here's the mix.
Can you come over here and help me out? I got a problem in love, I gotta work it out. You see, I've got a man, and I love him so, but I got a little love that I want even more. Oh, every time I float.
It's Dave Rollicky, he's amazing. And then I have some strings going on here. I'm just going to give you a very quick overview just so you can hear what's going on. They're not the best samples in the world, just some Logic sounds. But, you know, but the reality is they're put into a relatively dense track with a lot of reverb. So if they were soloed out, you'd probably hear some of the you know, it's not bad. It's not too bad at all. Part of the reality with doing a track like this is I'm using a lot of saturation. Not everywhere and tons of it, but just enough, maybe a little bit more than I'm used to, just to kind of glue things together and also make it sound a little older. You know, because this track is a retro sounding song. There's background vocals, there's beats, there's all kinds of fun stuff. Oh, one of the fun things I did was organ. If I'll show you that quickly. There's a Nord organ here. The super 60s kind of like sci-fi movie organ. Here you go in the chorus. It's just very kind of cocktail kind of music, you know. It's on 3 tracks. It could actually be put onto 2 because there's only one place that it overlaps here. So it's fun. There's some really fun stuff. And then there's some piano, which I separated into left hand and right hand. And the reason for that is it just makes mixing so much easier if you can control the left hand bass with the high line movement in the right. And that's the great thing about if you're using, you know, virtual instruments, you can get in there and separate it. Obviously, you know, live, I could record them separately as well. But this is all virtual as far as the strings, the organ, and the piano is concerned. Everything else is played live. Okay, let's check out the beat. Well, actually, while we're talking about the beat, this is performed, like placed, performed, but it's just very generic kind of kick and snare samples. It doesn't have full sustain. If we go to the chorus, so I've taken that low kind of timpani sound that I cut up and put in there, added a MaxxBass on it. Hear that extra bottom end. Then air reverb. So you can see the extra reverb there from the air reverb. And then last but not means least is a limiter. And you can see what I've done is I've taken the link control. So the link, I've pulled it down so the output ceiling never changes. I'm still getting the same output level that I want, but it's completely controlled. So look at the chorus here, for instance. See? Take it off. Take it off, it's just that clap is just that little bit too loud, a little bit out of control. So that's sort of our main beat that we worked off. And then I added one of my samples, which is this kick here, which is a clicky kick. So it's like the click of the kick when you get together. It just gives it a little bit more definition in the track.
I gotta work it out.
You've got the weight on that beat with the MaxxBass, and then you've got that clicky kick there, just giving it a little nose, just having it poke out a bit. Okay, so you can see the settings I've got there, pretty straightforward. And then I've created a drum reverb here on 1718. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's being sent to that. The first one of those things is this hip-hop tambourine I've got here. It's called a hip-hop tambourine, but you know, any tambourine that's used in the genre of music could be called a hip-hop tambourine or a rock tambourine. That's just what it's called. And so I take the reverb off. It's pretty dry, so it's just giving it a little extra. You know, there's a lot of ambience on this track. The songs from like the 50s, late 50s and 60s, the Stax, Motown, Atlantic stuff, a lot of it was recorded, well, not a lot of it, I think most of it just recorded live in a room. So some of that extra reverb, you know, the plate, etc., chambers, was added by guys like Phil Spector, obviously, a lot of it, but also the fact that they were all in the same room. There was a lot of bleed between instruments, so a lot of ambience. So I'm trying to recreate that because this is essentially me and a sax player, you know, and he overdubbed the saxes at his own studio and sent them to me. So the rest of it is like me running backwards and forwards, clapping hands, stomping feet, playing guitar, playing bass, etc. So, you know, we're using a lot more verb because we're trying to recreate, I should say, that particular sound. Okay, next up, or going down, is some claps, which is, of course, like I was saying, live claps. And that's going to a separate clap reverb down here, which is basically some compression, a doubler. If I take that off, it just roughens it up a bit. I mean, they're live, so they're a bit out of time. Look, you zoom in here, for instance, they're not like gridded at all. You know, if anything, one's pretty tight and then one's really sloppy. I mean, that's really sloppy here. But that wide, oh, there's a wood block down here, for instance. There's a rake sound. Now the rake is I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but like a gyro. It's basically like a football-looking thing with serration across it, and I'm taking actually a pencil. And why a pencil, not a drumstick? I see people doing drumsticks. The pencil has flat edges, so it's easier to get that sound across it. I've done it with drumsticks, but I don't get that articulation. So, you know, it's a lot of live instruments just kind of here mixed in with the drum beat. So that's all live, played, performed. And then I've got the Motown beat with the placed PR. It was kind of fun. If we go to the chorus at its busiest, just take a section here. Another tambourine, a live one down here, which is pretty sloppy. I mean, you can see how wide this is. I mean, look at this. This is pretty wide. These aren't all exactly like perfectly in time. They're sloppy and they sound like human beings played it, which is interesting because it actually was a human being who played it. So on the console here on channels 35 and 36, you'll see I have labeled loops, miscellaneous, percussion. Now, this serves a couple of purposes. I usually, in fact, 99.9% of the time don't have any compression or EQ on these channels. And that's typical. Sometimes here I'm putting the EQ and compression in and out. In this instance, all of the hand claps and the stuff that I built, all of that percussion, is EQ'd and compressed the way I want it to hear it. So all the console is doing is just providing a stereo source to go through. So we can listen to it, but it's just essentially this. So that's it. Then I did some a bass line, which is really, really straightforward. If we go to the second half of the verse. But what will you notice about this bass line? Well, this bass line has got reverb on it. It's got a spring reverb. So a couple of things that are interesting on the bass. I just did a little bit of a time adjuster just here on the DI. So we zoom in on the DI here. You'll see that I took this waveform here and dragged it back to here just to, you know, basically get the phase better, the polarity better. It's basically, everything is essentially late on the amp, which is understandable. The microphone is pulled back from the speaker. There's a certain amount of delay, if you like, where a DI, of course, is so immediate. So it's typical to, you know, bring these waveforms and drag them back. And I approximated about 155 samples. Now there are, I'm sure you guys know, of plenty of softwares that sits there and manipulates it. I superstitiously don't do that, but I know you can, and if that's what works for you when you get these files, if you want to pull them back using another software, an alignment software, please do. Phase is really, really important, obviously. It's one of the most important things, and creating room in your mixes, like, you know, using high pass properly and really effectively will give you more room for the low end to breathe. One of the biggest mistakes, of course, is to not high pass, thinking that you're going to get more low end. Usually what happens is you get less low end because you get a lot of phase cancellation of all these instruments with these huge waveforms all slightly out of phase of each other. Polarity turns into a big muddy mess. So for instance here, here's a good example. Like we take the bottom end on here. Here's a good example of why high passing works. Hopefully you guys can all hear this. So let us turn all the plugins off. We can leave the time adjuster on so that the phase is good, the polarity is good. Okay, so here's the bass sound. Okay, not a huge amount of bottom end. If I turn this EQ 1 on here, now what's happening is I'm rolling everything above 700 out completely on my DI. If I go over to my amp, I'm doing the opposite. Now what's happened? There's no drop in bottom end. In fact, if anything, it's slightly better, even without the RBass. Because what's happened is the amp now no longer has any low end that is fighting any kind of polarity issues with the DI. The DI is giving me the pure bottom end, and then the amp, which is always going to be an approximation of the waveforms on the low end, is no longer causing any phase cancellation. So you get better bottom end. High passing will help you when used properly to get better bottom end. Having multiple sources of low end, this is a great example. You could have like a kick and a bass guitar and the low end of an electric guitar. If they're all playing a lot of low mids and low end down there, especially low end, they'll actually cause more phase issues than anything else. So they won't give you more low end, they'll give you more mud and less definition. You really should plan your high pass really, really well because it's your friend. Once I put in the RBass, huge difference. I'm using a massive amount because this bass tone is a classic late 50s, early 60s kind of Stax tone. Then I've got a C4, which isn't doing a huge amount. It's just a multi-band compressor, just controlling any excessive low end, and then evening it out. It's barely doing anything at all. But, you know, it's there for a fail-safe. I could get more aggressive with it, but at the moment it's not doing a huge amount. The bass mic is actually got a decapitator on it. Love it. So, cool. And then, of course, there's, as I said earlier, there's a spring reverb. You know, I read that Jeff Emmerich used to love putting a little bit of reverb on Paul's bass, and Paul didn't like it, but when he'd leave the room, he'd put it back on again. Now, I think that classic kind of Staxy, you know, Motown, Atlantic sound does have that room tone on it. And again, it's because probably the instruments were bleeding a lot more into each other than we're used to now. With multi-track recording now, we're used to so much separation. So I'm adding extra verb for that little bleed. And, you know, just because I want it to be a bit washy and classic sounding. Now this bass auxiliary here can go because it's not actually being used. So that can go. Okay, so there's my basic setup. Basic bass tone. Let's put it in with all of our percussion, which is my hand claps, wood block, the giro or wiro. I don't know how you pronounce it properly. You can all laugh at me. And I've got a Latino down here I asked how to pronounce it, and he didn't know. Let's go to that chorus. It's interesting to me, the drum groove has a little bit of, as I walk alone, I wonder, you know, it's kind of got some classic grooves going on there. Which, you know, Dion is a whole different feel altogether. But it's all reminiscent of that 50s, late 50s, early 60s thing that we're going for. You know, a lot of great country of that period also seemed to have very similar production, but the vocals were very different. You know, I love that sound with all of those verbs and stuff and the room tones. And this is the same thing. It's actually peaking here. But there's no EQ, no compression, and it's peaking. It's an interesting one. There's a sort of a softness that comes when this thing peaks. It doesn't go, it kind of softens a little bit. Which in this instance, I didn't mind. Sometimes when the red light's holding on too much, the peak indicator's on too much, like on a snare drum, it's horrible. Occasional transient on the snare drum is really tasty. When it stays on solid red on the snare drum or for long period of times, I personally don't like it. So there you go, no compression, no EQ, everything done again in Pro Tools. Okay, next up is my guitar. That's a Strat, if ever I heard one. I've got the SSL, Waves SSL channel on it. Not a lot going on. A little bit of high mid boost there at about 5K, 5.5K. A little low, well, mid-range cut at 800. And that's it. No compression, no EQ. Ton of verb. Okay, so the electric guitar is quite different. Did a lot of work on electric, very typical for what I do. Firstly, EQ, any boost is going into compression. So these controls here, channel out, are placed in. So what I'm doing is I'm boosting quite heavily, like 6 to 9 dB at about 5K, and that's going into the compressor. And because it's peaking at those frequencies, the compressor's squashing it back in, and it gets that pap, pap, that pap, pap. Very SSL sound. If I take it out, it's nice, but put it in. It's got pap, pap, pap. Love it. It's a very uniquely SSL sound that I love. There's a little cut at 2K. That's very typical for me to pull out 2K. 2K can get really crowded, and the last thing I want is electric guitars in there giving me a lot of 2K. Then I'm pulling out some 800 and I'm boosting some 200. So I've got this kind of low mid boost. I've got a dip at about 2K and then I've got some 5K. But this is the most important thing and very, very important. I am using high and low pass filters. I'm high passing at about 80. So it gets me out of the low lows of the bass and gets me out of the way of the kick. It's very important that you understand high passing. High passing is your friend. If you can create just a bit of clarity in there, you can get all of the lows to go really nicely together. And then on the top, I'm low passing at about, what are we talking about? 11K, 10K? About 11K. And so I don't need anything above that. That's like the air on my vocal. That's the air on my vocal and the cymbals living up there, like the 11, 12 kind of area. I don't need a sizzle on the electric. So I'm controlling the low end to let the bass and the kick live, and I'm getting rid of any real high-end boost that's going to get in the way of the air on the vocal and cymbals, etc. All right, this is the big part of this song, beyond obvious keys and stuff. This is a big part because it's the acoustics. One of the things that Phil Spector is synonymous with is that idea of a bunch of acoustic guitars. And there's stories of, like, 4, 5 or 6 guys in a circle around one microphone all playing, and that sort of slightly, slightly rubbing time stuff gives it that thickness. And I know, great guys like Jeff Lynne love that with ELO, those multiple acoustics, and I do too. So we have a main guitar part in the verses, which uses this. This is my Yamaha LL16. And as those of you that watch me, he says denting it, will know this is my main tracking acoustic. It's gorgeous. So that's the main acoustic guitar. In the choruses, a second acoustic guitar comes in fact a stereo pair, which are panned about 50 or 60% left or right using the same acoustic. Let's have a listen to that. And that's quite a tight voicing. And then that's doubled by Nashville tuning guitar. Here it is. This is the cheapest guitar I own. In fact, it was actually thrown out in a skip. And, whoop. If you haven't already watched it, you can watch my acoustic guitar video where I talk about using Nashville tuning. And I've heard it called high strung as well, if you don't want to call it Nashville. But essentially what it is it's a regular high E, regular B, octave G, octave D, octave A, octave E. And that gives you. It's just great. I love it particularly on arpeggios because you can get. You can add stuff like that, and then when you dub it with a regular acoustic, you'll get the best 12-string sound you've ever heard. So that's the Nashville there. So we have a pair of those, again, a little wider, 60, 70%. So here I have a little J. Bovio. It was pretty inexpensive, little mandolin. So I'll do, with the mandolin, I'll double the part again. So it gives me, I've got the Yamaha, left and right, not full left, not full right, and then I've got the cheap Epiphone acoustic, high strung, doubling that, and then a mandolin. And that gives us this. With my main acoustic. Add my guitar stabs. It's just a great groove, fun thing. It's lovely doing these kind of retro pieces. You get to have some real fun and just work on grooves and not worry about things being hip or not. You just do what sounds the best, Acoustic guitars is quite of a big deal. If you come over here, I'm doing nothing. I'm not EQing and I'm not compressing. I recorded the acoustic guitars the way I wanted them. I used a small diaphragm condenser and I recorded it on the body of the guitar. So I don't get the boominess, and also this is an old school sounding track. I don't want that super modern percussive, you know, high-end boosted acoustic guitar sound. If I wanted that, I would do it, but the song would be far more pop. This is a pop song in as much as, you know, she wrote a very hooky song, but it's not a pop production. It's not like a super slick, sizzly, top-end, percussive acoustic sound. So all of the EQ, all of the compression was done in the DAW, in Pro Tools. Also, it's important to note on the acoustic that where I have it panned left or right, I have reverb panned the opposite direction, just to kind of give a halo of verb around the guitars, which also helps kind of glue them together and make them feel old. As I was talking about a second ago, you know, the Phil Spector idea is what came to me with those acoustics. The idea of a mic in the middle and then like 3 or 4 guys sitting around. Hence mandolin, high-strung acoustic and regular acoustic, all playing together. And even though they're stereo, they're like 30 or 40, 50%. Nothing's like panned super wide. Back to the Nord. So these organs that I did are going through an auxiliary here, which is, you know, an old favorite of mine, a McDSP plugin with a dip at 1K of about 4.5 dB here, and some low roll-off. High passing there, gentle high pass, just allow that room so we can have the lows of the bass and the kick, etc. grow. Another 1176 plugin, followed by, yes, you guessed it, Decapitator again. Decapitator Soundtoys features quite heavily in what we do. I really like what they do. It just gives us a little bit of a crunch. You know, if I take this main one here, without, so it's adding a lot to the sound because I'm super bright tone. The low cut and high cut are set full open, but it's just brightening the tone and a bit of drive. Full effect. Take it off. It's kind of dark and nasally. Let's hear it in the track.
I got a man, but you got me tied in a knot so I can't see.
I always think of an album that you used to see in the 60s and the early 70s called Music to Watch Girls Dance By. You ever see that? It's a really kitsch kind of album, you know, it's all the girls dancing like this. I love making a fool of myself, you know, doing all this stuff, and they always had this kind of Vox Continental, Vox Jaguar kind of sounds. You know, cheap organ, but it's kind of cool. They're cheap because they have zero dynamics. It's just kind of on, off kind of sound, but they sound really, really cool. And again, you guessed it, drenched in reverb. So next up is the piano. And like I said earlier, it is left and right separated. So I've got the left hand here. And then the right hand separated. As you can see, I've taken the left hand and turned it down nearly 8 dB. And there's a flub in that. Hey, I'm not perfect. It's midied and timed up, but there's a 5K boost, a 400 cut, and here's some reverb on the piano. All right, great stuff coming out of our piano output. The piano, on the other hand, compared with some of the other tracks, like the electric, has quite a lot of work. So I've got nothing on the low end, nothing on the low mids. The high mids have a good 3 or 4 dB of 5K boost and about 9K, another 3 dB. I've got a high pass at about 80, and I've got a low pass, actually on the left hand, slightly more aggressive than the right hand, at about 8 and the other one at about 10. Why is that? Well, you know, left hand traditionally it should be a bit darker, so I don't need any high-end sparkle on that. But not only do I have that going, I'm also using hardware. So the hardware we're using is Pultex. They're on the inserts on the channel. I'm getting, this isn't dB, it's 3, so it's about probably a couple of dB, 1.5 to 2 dBs worth of gain. This is not, these don't pertain to dBs. I'll have to ask Steve Jackson, maybe somebody else remembers, but I think it's about 6 dB when it's here. So we've got about 1.5, 2 dBs worth of gain at 100. And then we've got a little bit more, maybe 2 to 3 dB at, you know, closer to 3 dB at 5K. So it gives us quite a lot of aggression. It's got the warmth, but it's also a little bit more high mids. Now, of course, it's also adding volume. because it's boosting lows and highs. So the signal is getting hotter, which helps, and there's something about running it through transformers that's really nice. It gives it some weight, often called warmth. I call it weight. That sort of reinforces it. But ultimately, it's a beautiful way to make a piano sound great. Even a virtual piano like that, whether it's recorded live or not, it's beautiful to use Pultex. Alrighty, now we have some horns. And this is Dave Rolicky, as I was explaining before. Wonderful horn player. Let's go to the chorus because it's a more complex part. So he's a great horn player. He also, not only does he play it, he records this at his own home studio and sends me finished, edited files where there's no background noise or anything. He's been wonderful. I've used him on this. I've used him on many, many records. I used him on Damien McGinty's album. For those of you that follow Damien, you know, who was on Glee. He's been absolutely amazing. I've used him on hundreds of sessions. Very talented guy and a sweetheart. And the horn bus is basically EQ, so some high-end boost, again, some lowish mid, I don't know, 600 hertz cut, which can go a little noisy. So getting rid of some of that. Another 1176 compression. But here's a big one, and this is, you know, free and cheap. The DigiDesign Real Tape Delay. It's a good one. It really helps. You know, up. And I've got that going into a lo-fi, which is another, of course, distortion. It gives me more level, a bit more aggression. The thing about using saturation like Decapitator and lo-fi is it just kind of like grits it up, obviously, but glues things together, also controls transients really well, because those excessive transients will get, you know, distorted, saturated if you like, and just pushed back in there. So I'm a big fan. And the lo-fi, I think, which, you know, comes free with Pro Tools, and I'm sure every DAW has its version, but what I love about it is it's the surefire, dumb way to just, you know, give yourself good even level, grit to glue things together. It's like my favorite way to simulate something that used to happen quite easily with analog equipment, where we used to have a lot of tubes, added distortion, tape, you know, all of this stuff used to distort and glue things together in a lovely way. That lo-fi plugin does a great job. Now, of course, there's tape simulations and emulations, etc. But, you know, for a free plugin, it's pretty darn good. And don't just take my word for it. I've seen Neil Avron use it. I've seen Mark Endert use it. I've seen many, many people use this plugin. It's a secret weapon, and it's free with Pro Tools. Okay, after that is pretty much my favorite plugin. Sorry, it's a great plugin. It's the MV2. It just squashes the top and the bottom, reduces the dynamic range, brings up the low stuff so it's a little bit more audible, and takes the top and just squashes it back in. It's a dumb plugin. It's really useful. Take it off. It's giving me additional level, of course. I can control that and bring it down to the output, but I like it. And it's just... it's really, really articulate. I love it. Big, big fan. Great. Well, it's articulate because it brings out those little moments in the horns I love. So great, great plugin. Next up is some horn verb. I'm controlling the dynamics going into the reverb. Good old-fashioned deverb. 1.6 second decay on a plate. Now, those of you that follow me and see me recording in places like Sunset Sound and United and all these classic old studios, lots of them have plates and chambers. And there's something really wonderful about a plate. And I've said this many, many times, and I've watched many great mixers do this. Almost all of them use a DigiDesign, Avid, old-fashioned plate. That plate simulation is really, really good. It's dumb, it's quick, it's low DSP, so I've always been a big fan of it. And then next up is an MV2 on the out, just to control it again. So take that off. You can hear the slap now. So the slap with that reverb just makes those horns feel like they were recorded, 50 or 60 years ago, and that's what I love. Okay, after the horns, we have our strings. Now there's a lot of string stuff. as you can see, nothing on the individual tracks, just on them all being bussed together. So if I find a section, here, where almost everything is playing. So let's take a little bit of a loop here. And there is all of these playing. So we've got the cello pizzicato at the top. Some legato strings underneath. You can hear exactly what's going on. There is distortion. And what's giving us that distortion? That saturation. It is our old friend Decapitator. Without it on, it's an exaggerated version of it, you know. It's really good. Now, I'm actually driving my 670 a little hard here. Just that. Take that off. So I'm getting some of that sound from just annihilating that Puig Fairchild there. And then that's going to an SSL channel. Some high mid boost. Some mid-range cut. A 440 low mid cut. But some low boost underneath there. So it's just kind of like, it's got some low end boost here at about 60 or 70. It's got some low mid boost at like 440, and then it's got some high mid boost at around about 5 or 6K. Then that's going into a decapitator, distorting it. Take it off. But some of that saturation is me annihilating the 670. And of course, using the analog channel, which any of you that follow me know I'm a huge fan. And that string reverb there is an RVerb. So there's another thing. Quite often you'll see me EQ going into a reverb or EQ coming out of it. You know, I'm especially on the lows, when it comes to like kick drums, for instance, I avoid putting low end into a reverb often. And the reason why I do that is won't just get the low end definition of the kick, you'll get all of the verb of it, like going all over the place. But on this, that's not an issue with the strings. However, I'm using the actual EQ built into the RVerb itself, and I'm taking the high end and cutting it down. And then there's a master for both the reverb and the string sub itself, and that is feeding the console. So the strings and the horns are all coming out the same place. Again, no EQ, no compression. All of that work I did inside of the DAW and Pro Tools, I'm preserving. I don't need to add any additional EQ or compression. It's coming out a stereo pair of faders, just marked keys. I did all the sound there, I don't need to double do it. And I didn't see the benefit of needing the SSL EQ for this particular song. It's beautiful, but that's all done from inside the DAW. Okay, next up, of course, is the most important part of the song, the vocals. So Ashleigh is an amazing singer. She's got a really, really great voice.
Can you come over here?
She just sounds like this genre. If I go to the chorus here.
Little love, always have a little love, gonna have a little love.
Now, if you've seen my vocal mixing video, you're going to know a lot of what I'm doing here. So first of all, I've got an RVox, and then I've got an EQ after it. And the RVox is doing quite a lot, about 7.2. Now I got that primarily, I've always used the RVox, and then when Michael Brower was mixing the phrase stuff I did, I noticed he also used the RVox. So it kind of reinforced it. I thought, well, if Michael can use it, it's good enough for me. You know, if it's good enough for him, it's definitely good enough for me. Then next up, some high boost at like 9.5K. I'm then trimming a little bit, only because I got a little carried away. And sometimes, you know, I have to control. Look, this is very, very important. When I'm mixing, and I talk about this a lot, when I'm mixing, I don't always start again when I want to change something. In fact, I don't start again. So I might stack stuff, and if it's too bright, if I go back to an earlier EQ and pull off the high end, it might screw up a lot of other things. So I might cut the high end later with an additional plugin. That might seem counterintuitive to you, but when you're watching somebody work and they're moving really, really fast, they do stuff like that. They might add something after it. And one of those things is, here I am, I've got the RVox, I've got that. I put a vocal rider on, and I maybe set it to somewhere that I feel comfortable with, and then, you know, maybe I added the trim before it, you know, thinking, oh, I want to control it a little bit, because it's peaking out a few different places here, and I just wanted to control it. There's all kinds of rationale. You don't have to add the trim there, but it's a nice little plugin if you're trying to control the signal going from one plugin to another. And that being the vocal rider, which is a fantastic plugin. It saves me writing a lot of automation. However, I'm still writing automation, as you can see. Here is a section, for instance, if we zoom in here, you'll see that I did some automation so that then
am I always gonna have a little love?
you see here she got love. She got to this really low note, and it's on the lowest end of her range, so it gets weak.
Little love.
So I boosted that going into the console. Next is a de-esser,
Little love.
which, you know, may or may not come in different situations.
Fall in love, it happened.
But one of my tricks that I love to do, and I know a lot of great guys that we like do, is I boost the high end and I use a de-esser to control it. So the overall vocal will still feel brighter, but the occasional note, the S or whatever, something about it gets too bright, it gets caught with the de-esser. And you'll find I'll do that multiple times. So I've gone EQ boost again, see, after the vocal rider, then I'm using a de-esser where it got a little out of control, and then another EQ boost, believe it or not. After a de-esser, that's going into an RComp, which is set actually to the default setting of the RComp, which I love. The RComp, for those of people that want to have said to me to speak very specifically, are a Renaissance compressor. We call it the RComp, that's what it comes up in your plugin list, but the Renaissance compressor. And that is then going into an REQ, another one.
But I met this crooner with big blue eyes.
With a little de-essing afterwards, you got it.
But I met this.
And at the end, I'm using a tiny, look at that, a tiny amount of distortion, 0.1, but you can hear the difference. At least I hope you can, I can. Here it is.
But I met this crooner with big
Off.
blue eyes.
On.
And he pulled me in.
Just adds a little tiny bit of grit on it. It's really wonderful. That's my vocal bus, and that's feeding console. Okay, coming up on the console as well is some vocal distortion. And the vocal distortion is a de-esser, an RVox to give it level, another REQ high-end boost going into a de-esser just to control that, and then going into a lot of distortion. So let's see if we can hear that. Okay, so let's break down the vocal additional effects that I've added. I've got the output on the vocal distortion here set to a louder output.
Fall in love, it happens again. And I told myself I wouldn't.
The lead vocal's cut on the console and the effects are cut on the console, so we're actually only hearing the distortion. This is super loud. This is not how you're actually going to hear it in the mix, but just so you can check it out. So I've got a de-esser going in first.
Fall in love, it happens again. And I told.
Another RVox just to control it. And bearing in mind, this is coming straight off of the lead vocal itself, so it's an identical bus input, 123, 123 here. Then I've got an REQ. Give me some more high end, a de-esser, and a lo-fi for distortion, which is adding quite a lot.
Fall in love.
But this is kind of the piece de resistance. This is what's giving us the most distortion. That's the SPL twin tube processor.
Fall in love, it happens again.
Off.
And I told.
Let's go to the chorus, for instance, where there's a lot more aggressive sounding vocal. Here we go.
Love, little love, always have a little love.
It's off.
Little love,
Back on.
gonna have a little love.
So you see there's extra harmonics and saturation that's happening. It's pretty tasty. However, I'm not using much of it. I'm actually putting out of a different output on the console, which is really not set very hot. But I wanted to illustrate it for you. Okay, next up is an octave. So that's just using good old-fashioned DIGIPACK pitch change 1 octave low. Super low. There's a gate on it, which is basically stopping the breaths coming through. We don't want like, you know, little love, and then to hear like, whoa, 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 you know, have an octave of the breath being triggered. So that's why we have the gate on it. And just to really make sure that we're only getting the low octave, we've got a low pass filter here set to 639. So you're not hearing anything above that. So I like using it a lot, the low octave quite a lot on girls' voices. As you can tell though, it's super low, but I like it. It just kind of adds just like a little bit of low energy back into the vocal, just that octave in there. So try it out. It's a good little trick. Okay, next up, last but no means least, and this is being used quite extensively and quite hot, is the whisper effect. It's pretty awesome. So we're now going to listen to it without the reverb in, but just with all of those effects. So the vocal distortion, the octave, and the whisper together.
Little love, always have a little love, little love.
So that whisper just gives it a little hair, that distortion, just a little crunch, the low octave, just a little girth. It's subtle stuff, but used together, you know, it brings out even more character in the vocal. Now, next up is the vocal thickening trick. Now, the vocal thickening trick I've done here with an H3000, which is over there. In the H3000, I print -3, +3, +6, -6, -9, +9. And what does that do? Well, that builds like a chorusing effect, essentially, because it's detuning and it's underneath. However, I like to print that because I like to use it as something that I can like manipulate, bring up and down in volume where I need it, as opposed to a plug-in where I have to go in there and adjust it with fiddly little parameters and automation and stuff. It's just me. I like printing effects where I can, especially outboard effects. Next up is our Lexicon PCM90 effects. There's the Vocal Magic and the Echo Plate. They're both pretty low in the mix, but both sound fantastic. There's an MV2 just to kind of get a bit more level out of them. Again, I like to print hardware where I can. Lots of reasons for that. Let's just say I give this to somebody else to mix, and this is a big part of my vocal sound. I don't know if they're going to have the same plugins as me. I don't know if they're going to have the same hardware. So I want them, because this is an integral part of the effect, wherever I can, I like to give people the option of like printed effects. Doesn't always happen, but it's a nice courtesy when you're giving it to another mixer. And for you guys and girls out there, you're going to have those same effects to play with that are printed. Next up is a good old bog standard reverb. It's a plate simulation on using the Renaissance reverb. There's an RComp afterwards. So I've set it to mono. So let's just start the vocal up here.
Sometimes I ask the God above, am I always gonna have a little love?
Quite a big difference. So those are all the multi-effects going on there. I've got a plate, again, pan mono, because a lot of, in the 50s and 60s, a lot of effects were specifically in mono. We didn't have like, you know, wide, expansive digital reverbs and stuff. There was just a plate. Stereo plates came in a little later, and they wouldn't always have utilized them. So a mono reverb is a great way to give it that kind of sound. I love mono reverbs, and that's just a plate panned left and right into the middle. Next up is a tiled room. That is actually in stereo. And typically the tiled room is like a shorter reverb that I might use more of in the verse. In this song, they're all going equally. I've got reverbs and delays going crazy. I've then got two delays. I've got an Echo Boy set to a 16th note, which is just fantastic. And then one of my old favorites, a quarter note with an RComp on it. So what's the RComp doing? Have a listen.
Wanna have a little love.
It's subtle, but the RComp is a sidechain compressor. So I'm coming from the lead vocal, if you come up here, coming from the output here, 10, and I'm sending off the lead vocal bus into the compressor. So what does it do? Watch the compressor.
Wanna have a little love.
It's subtle, but it's compressing the delay. It's reducing it about 4 or 5 dB. And then as soon as the vocal stops singing, it stops feeding the compressor and it lets it open up. What does that mean? Well, that means you get like, I don't know, no. So you get the delay appearing after the vocal ends and not mudding up the articulation of the vocal. So yes, sidechain compression is really fun. It's great on effects, especially delays and reverbs, and just in general, you can do really cool things. Another great trick of sidechain compression, which I've talked about a lot in the Academy and other videos, you have to excuse me, is when you want to just duck a couple of dB out of a conflicting instrument. So if you had a lead guitar shredding on the end of the outro of a song and you had a lead vocal coming in, or vice versa, you might want to duck a couple of dB out of that electric guitar every time the singer sang a line. And sidechain compression is just the best way to automate that. So you can have the guitar blaring, and then when the vocal comes in, it just ducks the guitar. And then they do this sensitive interplay between the two. And it is a quick, easy way to do vocal and guitar automation. It will save you hours of work. So on the lead vocal, there's quite a lot going on here. I'm up to about 300 and I'm boosting a little bit over 3 dB. At 2.5, I'm cutting 3 dB. At 6.5K, I'm boosting about 4 dB. And at 10K, I'm boosting about 6 dB. I'm not doing any cut on the top, but I am cutting at about 100. So I'm basically boosting some lows, 300. I'm wiping out about 100 down here. I'm boosting some 300. I'm cutting some 2.5, cutting around that kind of area, and then I'm coming up like 5, 6, 7 up, and I'm just boosting up the top. And if I take it out, it's a good sounding vocal without it in. But put it in, I'm getting 3, 4 dBs worth of gain reduction, and it's just making it just a little bit more forward and a little brighter. So again, I'm going channel out, so I'm coming from EQ into compression, and that makes it just a little spankier, a little bit more. I love that sound on SSL. So there you have it with the lead vocal. We're getting pretty close. I mean, next up really is just the backgrounds, of which there's quite a few. So here's the first set of backgrounds, which come in on the first chorus. Little love, little love, little love, little love. And again, you'll notice with this song, I don't do as much wide panning as I might do with like a rock song. There's not as much LCR going on as I would with like a heavy rock, left-hand heavy guitars, right-hand heavy guitars, kick and snare, bass down the middle, lead vocal down the middle. Of course, there's still the centered kind of things like bass and drums, etc., and lead vocal. However, look, the backgrounds here are like 40, 60, 30. They're just kind of grouped around the lead vocal. It sounds more natural. You know, in those days, the sort of period we're sort of not copying, but trying to be reminiscent of, the late 50s, early 60s, it was mainly mono, primitive stereo recording. And of course, it would be like a bunch of girls or guys grouped around a microphone. So you wouldn't be able to create that big, wide stereo. So here's just a little bit. Little love, little love. We've got an RVox on every channel, and we've got a little high boost here, like 9K, just a little air on the top, and some high passing down at 100, and a gentle slope, like 6 dB an octave. And that is all feeding an 1176, a Waves 1176, and an Reverb with the high end cut off it. And also an H delay, which is a wonderful plugin, set to the BPM of the song. So we can test other parts of the song. Sometimes I ask the God above, am I always gonna have a little love, little love, little love? Great part, I love that little love part. It's written in context. Cool. Great singing, just great part. Here's the outro BV. It's got a bit of hair on it. It's got a bit of grit, you know. It's not perfect, but that's really this song. Things a little gritty, little saturated, a little overdriven, and lots of reverbs and delays. It sort of glues it together. We've gone away from making everything LCR. Things are a little narrower. There's some mono verb on the vocal, which is super loud. The backgrounds, the instruments are a little tighter around it. And it just feels, you know, a little bit more retro and has a really great groove. Okay, the BVs a little bit more EQ. I actually mixed into the EQ and compression I already have. Let's have a listen. So the EQ is actually quite aggressive. There's nothing going on these lows. That's set to there, but there's no boost. But there's quite a lot. There's like at least 3 dB at 5K, and there at about 7K, there's 6 dB. However, if you see up to 200, it's high passed. So I've high passed up to 200, and about 11 or 12 I've come in. So I've narrowed the BVs a little bit. 200, so there's no low lows getting in the way of anything. The compression I'm applying is after the EQ, so it's not spanky sounding. If I press play again, you'll hear. It's barely hitting the compression. Yeah, nothing to speak of. So, here's my bass setting. I've got it set to auto on the release, the attack, 30, it's full to the right. I'm getting about 2 dB gain reduction, which is pretty typical for me, a couple of dB. Take it out. Just gluing it together a little bit. Just occasionally getting 2.5, 3 dBs worth of gain reduction. Notice one other thing. I'm hitting pretty hard on my master bus. It's not quite as pinned as it looks, but it's pretty heavy. There's also something else that I personally like about SSLs, and a lot of SSL guys like, is they like hitting their master bus pretty hard. It seems to just translate a little better. Some consoles like vintage knees I used to have in 8058 did not like the master bus slam. You could hit the mic pre's hard when you were tracking, but the master bus itself, especially on pianos, we're going to go whenever I play a piano hard, you know. So, but an SSL is a little bit more forgiving on that, and I like printing it decently hot. I mean, it's not massively hot. If we look at our final mix here, as you can see on the master bus, even though it's seemingly hitting the master bus pretty hard, I mean, it's not that smashed at all. Still a ton of headroom for the mastering engineer to do his or hers magic. So I hope you enjoyed that. Please follow the link below and you can download the files. And of course you can try out the free trial of the Academy. We also do a monthly. You'll get to download these files every single month. There's a new song, you'll see me do a mix breakdown, and best of all, we do mix critiques every week where I listen to everybody's mixes, and we call it Feedback Friday. And also inside of the Academy, there's about 1,100 people that will help you out. It is an incredibly helpful, friendly, supportive place, and it's growing fast, and everybody inside of it is super supportive. Enjoy the song. Ashleigh's really talented. Please post it, link below, post on the Facebook page, you know, Produce Like a Pro Facebook page. I'd love to get some feedback from everybody about the mixing, the song, the production. Let me know. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing, and thank you ever so much, and I'll see you all again very soon.